Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I'm talking about The Mist, a novella by Stephen King, originally published in 1980, and I am comparing it with the movie The Mist, directed by Frank Darabont, released in 2007. And last month I had a poll on my YouTube community page, and it was 4 different Stephen King novellas having you all vote on which one I should cover, and the winner was The Shawshank Redemption, which I covered at the start of the month. But The Mist was runner-up, and I decided that I would just do 2 Stephen King novellas this month, and that I would cover The Mist as well, since that was second place. So you should definitely subscribe to my YouTube channel. I post those book versus movie polls fairly regularly, about every other month or so. And then if you become a Patreon, I post book versus movie polls on there too, so you guys can help choose what I cover. You can also make requests if you're a Patreon. You can make requests even if you're not a Patreon, but the way I have it now is that if you are a Patreon, your request, is a high priority. But on to The Mist. So this was, like I said, released in 1980, and it was part of a short story collection from a lot of different authors. They all contributed to this book called Dark Forces. But then Stephen King had it republished yet again in 1985 in his own short story collection called Skeleton Crew. And as far as this book goes, I found it to be a middle of the road kind of book. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it. When I was reading it too, I wasn't immersed in it. Like some books, you're just there. But then other books, you feel almost detached as you're reading because you're just not as invested, I guess, and you're not as connected to the characters. And so it was more of a detached reading experience for me. And I'm not going to get into spoilers yet, but also what happens with The Mist wasn't what I was expecting. And when you find out the kind of story this is, I was a little disappointed, and it just wasn't as creepy or scary as I had wanted it to be. Which that's always kind of a weird balance for me, because I like when a book can creep me out and get me scared. However, if it's so scary that I'm scared to go to sleep at night, I don't like that. I don't like being scared in bed at night. So I want it to be creepy and scary, but I don't want it so badly that I get nightmares and can't sleep, So it's a tough balance for me to try to find in life. But yeah, and then as far as the character development, that is one reason why I love Stephen King, is he has great character development, and we do see into David, our main character, and there is a side story in the book about how his dad was an artist, this big shot artist who had exhibits and things. And so Frank is in his shadow, and he wants to be a big time artist, but that doesn't end up happening. And his art pays the bills, but it's just, it's not like he's an artist selling paintings for a ton of money and putting on shows or something. He just is a freelance artist doing advertisements and whatever. But yeah, there was this story about how he had this painting that he thought was proof that he could have been a big artist and that he had the talent for it. But then as time goes on, he's kind of humbled, and he realizes that maybe that painting wasn't as impressive as he thought. But he also just is at peace and accepts that, you know what, I'm a decent artist, and being pretty good, it pays the bills. Maybe I'm not some big name with, fancy exhibits, but I'm paying the bills with my art, and that's good enough for me. So he just learns to accept that about himself. So there was some good character development. Like I said, I was still detached from the characters in a way, so I wasn't super invested in any of them, including David, but, I still thought they were good characters. But onto the movie. This movie is actually directed by the same guy who did The Shawshank Redemption. So this month I have 2 Stephen King books, and both of the movies are the same guy. And then Thomas Jane stars in The Mist, and Thomas Jane also starred in Dreamcatcher, another Stephen King adaptation, which I covered earlier this year. So you can check that out if you want more Thomas Jane Stephen King coverage. But I read that Frank Darabont had been working on this script for 20 years, and he was very committed to this ending, which again, I'm not going to get into spoilers yet, but the ending is I don't even know what to say about the ending yet. But he was so committed to this ending that he sacrificed a larger budget because he didn't want the production company or whatever, the producers, he didn't want them changing his ending. And so if there was one production company that wanted a say in it, and he was no, not doing that. I'm sticking with what I wrote. And so he ended up doing a deal for less money just so he could stick with what he wanted the story to be. And I do think that's awesome. I love that he stuck to what he wanted. And Stephen King loves this ending too. And he's wow, I wish I would have done that for my book. But I will say, sacrificing a higher budget did cause the CGI to be pretty bad at times. I'm assuming if he had a higher budget, it would have looked better. There were moments that were still well done and it still looked good, but there were a lot of moments where it just took away from the movie watching experience. So I feel practical effects is always the best way to go because one, it's like more disturbing and gross, but it also holds up better. Like movies from the 70s or 80s that had practical effects, it looks so much better than these movies from the early 2000s that have bad CGI, right? So I'm definitely all about the practical effects. I mean, it can be too gross sometimes, and like it's impressive what they can do, but it's just so disgusting, but it's more effective than CGI, right? But yeah, this movie is streaming on Netflix, so if you have a Netflix account, I would say it's worth watching, and it kind of plays homage to The Thing in certain ways, and you even in the beginning, because David is an artist, and you see he has this like picture that apparently he has painted, and it's from The Thing. So I feel like that's a pretty obvious nod to that movie, which again, that's from the 80s. They have the practical effects. I've only seen that movie like once or twice, and it was a while ago, but it is so disgusting, and it is still just so effective decades later. But anyway, going forward, I'm now going to get into the details of the book and movie, so there will be spoilers for both throughout the rest of this video. But the book and movie begin with this really bad storm that happens during the night, and when they wake up the next day, meaning David, his son Billy, and his wife, they wake up the next day, and you know, the picture window in their living room, a tree has fallen through it, this other tree has landed on their boathouse, another tree has landed on their neighbor's car and ruined it, and the place is just a mess. And so David is going to go into town and just get supplies that they need, and his neighbor Norton, the one whose car was destroyed, he and Norton like don't have the best relationship because like the previous summer David had sued Norton over something with their property, and Norton is an out-of-towner. This is just his vacation home, whereas David like lives there, and David won the lawsuit, and so Norton feels like it was the locals against him, and that's why he lost. So they don't have the best relationship going on, but his car has been destroyed, so Norton is like, hey, can I get a ride with you to the store? And David agrees. In the book, before they're getting ready to leave, David suddenly at the last minute, like he wants his wife to come with him. And so he says, you know, he tries a couple of times to try to get her to join them, and he's just like stalling for time, not like wanting to leave for the store, but he doesn't know why. But his wife is just, you know, like, oh, I don't need to go, it's fine, you know. I'm just going to stay here and take care of whatever needs to be cleaned up. And so reluctantly, David, his son Billy, and Norton leave and go to the store and leave the wife at home. And so they get to the store and it is crazy busy, plus the power is out, and so they're using a backup generator, but for the cashiers to check out, it's just very slow going. And so after they do their shopping, they're waiting in this long line, slowly moving. And while they're in line in the book, this kid runs in and tells them that there's this mist like approaching up the street that's crazy looking. And by the way, before they left for the store, they had seen the mist out on the lake. David also had a dream that night of the storm that like God was walking, and God was so big that he could only see the feet, but he saw God walking and God was leaving the mist like in his path. But that dream is left out of the movie. Anyway, so in the book, this kid runs and tells them about the mist. And then later, this other guy comes running in and saying that, you know, like something took someone out of the mist, just like scooped him out. And so they shut the doors and they're just like watching as this mist takes over, and it's very ominous. Whereas in the movie, this guy comes running in and he has a bloody nose and he's telling them like, you know, so-and-so was taken and there's something in this mist that's approaching. And so in both, they, you know, just shut the doors of the store and watch this approaching mist. And there is a woman in both book and movie where as this is happening, she's like, I mean, I need to get back home because I have, you know, this 8-year-old watching my toddler, and the 8-year-old, like sometimes she forgets to pay attention and something could happen to the toddler. Like I need to get home to my kids. Otherwise, like they're not going to be safe. The 8-year-old isn't old enough. And she's trying to find someone like who will help me walk home in this mist, but nobody wants to. And she turns to to multiple men, and they all just are like, you know, not going to do it. And so she ends up braving it and walking out by herself. And then David ends up seeing part of what is in the mist when he goes to the back of the store. And there was something with the generator where he like turns it off and they need to get it back on. And so then Ollie, the store manager, plus these two other guys, plus Norm, who is a bag boy, they come out back. And Norm, the bag boy, is like, oh, you can just open this door thingy and I'll like slide under, fix the hose or whatever, and then I'll come back inside, no problem. But David had like heard something outside, so he doesn't want Norm to do that. And he's like, no, it's not safe. You should not do that. But everybody else as in, you know, the two other people there, they're like, what's the big deal? Like, it's fine. Like, we don't hear anything. And he's volunteering to do it. So let's just let him do it. And so long story short, Norm ends up being killed when this tentacle thing comes out and attacks him. David tries to save him, but to no avail. And they like chop off part of the tentacle thing. So once they shut the door, there's this tentacle there. And so they know that there's some sort of creature out in the mist. And Ollie, one of the store managers who like has a solid head on his shoulders, he and David become partners of sorts in this ordeal. And so after this happens with Norm, they're talking and they're like, we need to warn people that there are like creatures in this mist that will kill you. And so they decide that they should tell Norton, David's neighbor, because he is a lawyer and he's also from the city. And they're like, if we get him to know what the truth is, he will help us convince people not to leave the store because it's too dangerous. And so they go to Norton and they tell him about this, but Norton just refuses to believe it. He is just like, no, this is ridiculous. You shouldn't be playing a joke on me. And he goes back to the trial or like the lawsuit the year before, being like, it's you locals against me, and you think you can make an idiot out of me, and I'm not gonna believe this. And they even tell him like, you can go see, we chopped part of it off. There's a tentacle in the back room. But he's like, no, I'm not gonna go look. You're just gonna make a fool out of me, and I'm not falling for it. And then he starts his own group together of people who want to leave the store and they're gonna try to leave, and they don't believe there's anything out there in the mist that can hurt them. So not only does Norton not believe them, but he starts this other group that refuses to believe there is anything in the mist. They won't even go in the back to even look, and they are formulating a plan to just leave and get back home. And David calls them the flat earthers in the book because they are just in denial of the truth. And this group does end up going outside. Before they go, David has this rope and he asks Norton, like, could you just tie this around your waist? That way we can at least see how far you get. But Norton again is just like not trusting and being like, no, what do you think this is? Like, I'm not falling for anything you try to push on me. But there is another guy in the group where he's like, I mean, I'll do it. I don't see the harm. So he does tie the rope around himself. Whereas in the movie, David tries to get Norton to tie the rope around him. He refuses. But then some other guy who's not part of the Flat Earthers, he's like, you know, I'll do it. I'll tie the rope around me. But I'm not leaving with Norton's group. I'm going to go out to a car and try to get a gun and come back. So I'm not leaving. I'll be coming back. I'm just getting a gun, but you can tie the rope around me just, you know, to see what happens. But in both, the group leaves. The guy, one of the men has a rope tied around him. And then as they're, you know, pulling the rope out for this guy, eventually it starts to be pulled upon like super hard. And then when the pressure is gone or whatever, they pull the rope back in. And of course it is all bloody and the people were killed and attacked. And then another key character I wanted to talk about is Amanda. So in the book, Amanda is from out of town and she just happened to be there when all of this was happening. Whereas in the movie, she like recently moved there, but she has moved there to become a school teacher. And in the book, David finds her very attractive. And as he like sees her throughout the day, he starts to realize how like sexually attracted to her he is. And he's realizing like, wow, this is so inappropriate for me to be feeling this way right now. But he like can't help it. He's like, maybe it's just this weird, drastic situation that is causing me to have these thoughts about her. But then later during the night, because he has his son Billy, remember, and Amanda has been helping to watch Billy, but during the night she comes up to him at one point being like, hey, you know, I got so-and-so watching Billy and I just looked and the office is empty. And David is like, huh? And she's like, I've seen the way you look at me. Like, let's go to the office. So they go to the office and they have sex there, which Mrs. Carmody is aware of. She somehow, I guess she sees that both of them going in there and knows what is happening. In the movie, we have Amanda, like I said, but we get rid of the part of them two getting together in the office, which I think was a good call. But speaking of Mrs. Carmody, so in the book, we did hear her referenced like before all of this happened, because when David is still at home, his wife mentions her because Mrs. Carmody owns this antiques shop and she like is into old wives' tales and superstitions, and she'll like spread her thoughts, and I guess David's wife is kind of influenced by what she says. And in both, once the mist appears, Mrs. Carmody, she's there in the store, she's part of this group, and she kind of goes a little crazy. In the movie, there is a great scene, which the book is written just from David's perspective, so we don't see anything he doesn't see. But in the movie, there is a great scene where Mrs. Carmody is in the bathroom, and she's like praying, asking like what she can do and how she can be like a vessel to spread God's word or something. And yeah, in both, she just believes that like she is God's mouthpiece, basically. And that when people go outside, she's like, don't go out there, it's death out there. And she says that God had this mist happen as like a punishment for what they have been, for like the people's sins or whatever. As the days go on, because this happens over the course, they're in the store for like 2 or 3 days, and Mrs. Carmody is just like constantly preaching and speaking, and they're like, man, like, does she ever sleep? Like, she is not stopping. And as the days go on, she just gathers a bigger and bigger group that are listening to her, And then eventually it gets to the point where she says the only way to get rid of the mist is to sacrifice someone. And in the movie, so like I said, there, is the tentacle monster in the mist, but as the movie and the book go on, we see that there are a lot of different creatures in the mist. And one of them are these like giant bug wasp things. And at one point in the movie, they get in the store and one of them lands on like Mrs. Carmody's stomach and she just stays super still and then it leaves and flies off. And so she sees this as a sign of showing how like, she is in the right and God is protecting her. And that is why that insect didn't harm her. But it's funny because on IMDb, there's like different trivia. And there was a funny bit of trivia where someone was speculating why the bug didn't hurt Mrs. Carmody. And so they have these like, a couple different ideas as to why it didn't hurt her. But then it ends with saying how like ultimately we just won't know why it didn't hurt her. And then they say, who knows what motivates giant insects, especially extra dimensional ones, which that was like the funniest IMDb trivia I've ever read, trying to speculate on what motivates extraterrestrial giant insects. So that was pretty funny. But to talk about the Arrowhead Project in the military, because in both there are these 3 military guys who are in the store, and there's like a military base nearby, and they have been working on something called the Arrowhead Project, and people in the town like know about it, and they like speculate on what's going on there, and like there's some sort of experimentation happening. And in the book, the 3 military guys, very soon after the mist appears, David or Ollie or one or both of them go in the back and they see that these 3 military men have all killed themselves. And so they're like, wow, like the Arrowhead Project clearly had something to do with these creatures in the mist. And so rather than like answer to us as to why this is happening, they just hung themselves instead. And the book just never gets too specific on what the military was doing. And like, it seems pretty obvious, like something they were doing caused this to happen, but we don't know for sure. Whereas the movie does give us a bit more answers because there's 3 military guys again in the movie. However, they all stick around for quite a while. And it's not until they go to the pharmacy, which I'll get into that, but they go to the pharmacy and there's this military policeman there and he's on the verge of dying, but before he dies he says something about how like he's sorry and it's their fault. And then after, when they get back from the pharmacy, 2 of the army guys are found dead, and then the 3rd one, he says that when they got back from the pharmacy he told them about the military police officer and what he said, and so the 2 guys said that they were going to kill themselves so that they wouldn't have to answer for what happened. But the 3rd guy didn't, and he's like, I didn't think they would actually do it. And he says how like he wasn't part of the Arrowhead Project, but that he like heard things and how they were trying to find like a portal to another dimension, and by messing with this they opened up a portal that led creatures from another dimension into our world. And Mrs. Carmody's group hears about this, and so she like calls him out and they bring him forward and they want him to like pay for what has happened, and they're blaming him even though he had nothing to do with it. But this guy in the movie, he ends up being stabbed, and then from there they dump him outside and one of the creatures kills him, which was such a crazy scene. And that did not happen in the book, but it was crazy in the movie, and poor guy. But to talk about the pharmacy really quick, because they go over there because it's right next door, and they're like, why, people in the pharmacy, they don't have any food. So it's been, over 24 hours. Like, why aren't they coming over here to the grocery store to get food? It doesn't make sense. So they go over there to see what is going on, and they see that it is covered in these spider webs, and the spider webs, if it gets on you, like it cuts you. And then of course there are these, extra dimensional spiders that come out and try to kill them. And in the movie they have this as well with the spiders, and the MP, he is like wrapped up in the spiders web stuff, and then like he ends up like getting all disfigured and weird and gross, and then spiders end up coming out of him. And so this scene I thought was really well done in the movie. Like I said, it kind of reminded me of The Thing with like the body horror, gross practical effects kind of a thing going on. I mean, it was CGI as well, but yeah, I thought that was well done and pretty gross and disturbing. But yeah, in the book, they go to the pharmacy and there's the spiders and everything, but there is no MP. Like I said, the movie gives more answers on that than the book did. But also in the movie, when they come back, one of the guys, he just has a mental breakdown after this, and after that he goes to Mrs. Carmody's side. But I thought his performance was really good, which, by the way, he was in Shawshank Redemption. He was one of the main prisoners. But yeah, when he comes inside and he just like breaks down, just like crying, and then from there he just becomes like an obsessed Mrs. Carmody follower. But yeah, so they want to sacrifice, like I said, and in the book, the soldier isn't killed, like I said, because he had committed suicide earlier. But in the movie, even after they kill him, I guess she doesn't see that as a sacrifice, because then she's still saying they need a sacrifice, and she specifically says she wants it to be Billy, David's son. Whereas in the book, she also says that she wants it to be Billy, but she says too that it could also be David or Amanda, and she calls them out being like, it should be David or Amanda because you sinned, I know what you did in the office. So she wants it to be one of them three. And in both, things are getting crazy because people are going crazy trying to get one of them to be sacrificed. And ultimately, Ollie, who has a gun, he has a gun that Amanda gave him, he ends up shooting Mrs. Carmody in both book and movie, and she dies. And that helps, shock people and calm them down a bit. And from here, David and his group are able to leave. But in the movie especially, like Marcia Gay Harden plays Mrs. Carmody, and she was fantastic. And oh man, she was just so good and so frustrating, and just seeing her get shot was a great moment, because it was just such a relief to be like, oh, thank you, get rid of this crazy woman, because she's stirring everybody up and causing people to just act out in these horrible, violent ways, specifically with that soldier. And then wanting to sacrifice a little boy. I mean, come on. But yeah, so like I said, in the movie, this happens when David and Ollie and Amanda and some others are wanting to leave the store, because eventually, even though they know it's dangerous to leave, they realize we can't stay here, because Mrs. Carmody's group is growing bigger and bigger, and they're getting crazy, and it's just not safe. So we have to find a way out. We can't just stay in this store forever. And so after Mrs. Carmody is shot, they end up leaving, and they reach David's car. Some of them don't make it. Ollie, for example, is killed along the way, which was sad. But David, his son, Amanda, and then 2 other people in the movie. So in the movie, it's 5 people make it, whereas in the book, it's 4. But basically in both, David is like, we'll just drive as far as my gas tank will let us and just see what happens. And so they drive and drive and drive, and they see these different creatures on their way, but they are protected because they're just in the car. And then eventually, though, the car runs out of gas, and they drove far, but the mist just continues on, and it seems like it has no end. And in the book, this is like a journal David is writing, and he talks about how they have a gun, but it only has 3 bullets. And there's 4 people. So he's like, if it gets to the point where we just need to kill ourselves, otherwise, we'll have a violent death by the creatures, he's like, we don't have enough bullets, so I'll just have to figure out what to do if we get there. However, it doesn't seem like that's what's going to happen, though, in the book, because the book ends with him, hearing something on the radio about going to Hartford, I think is what he talks about, and just how, he has hope that they'll find, a safe place that they can go to. Which they were running out of gas, though. Maybe in the book, did they not entirely run out of gas? Because he leaves his journal behind in, some store they had gone inside on the way, but they were going to continue on. And it ends very ambiguously, but it kind of makes you think that they're going to be okay. At least that's how I interpreted the ending of the book. But the ending of the movie, so they're driving, eventually they run out of gas, the mist is still continuing, and so he takes out the gun, and like I said, there's 5 of them in the movie, but they only have 4 bullets. So he's counting them out, and he's like, there's 4. And Amanda is like, I mean, that's not enough for everybody. But David is like, don't worry, I'll figure it out. And then the camera pans out. We see the car from the outside, and we see that he, fires 4 gunshots, and we see the blood that he has killed these 4 other people. Then we go back inside the car, and he is kind of frantic and trying to shoot himself, even though he knows it won't work because he doesn't have any bullets. And so then he gets out of the car, and he's yelling for the creatures, being like, come get me. But as he's standing out there waiting to be killed, the mist, he suddenly sees military vans driving through the mist, and the mist starts to kind of dissipate and disappear. And he also, that woman earlier who had left to go find her children, he sees her in this van of people that are being, protected and driven somewhere safe. But basically the mist is leaving, and everything is going back to normal. I mean, normal. The military people are putting out fires, and it's kind of chaotic, but still there's no creatures, and the mist is leaving and people are being driven to safety. And so he sees this, and he's like, what? I just killed those 4 people. And he, goes kind of hysterical, understandably, because he just shot 4 people, including his son, his 10-year-old son he shot. And now he realizes he shot them for nothing, because just seconds later, the mist leaves and they would have been fine. So that's how the movie ends, which you're just like, oh my gosh, what a downer of an ending, right? And I did read a theory where someone was like, Mrs. Carmody claimed that if they did a sacrifice, I think in the movie she said it could have been Billy or Amanda, but she for sure wanted Billy. And she was like, if we sacrifice them, that'll, appease God and the mist will be lifted. And so someone theorized that she was right, because after David shoots Billy and Amanda, the mist leaves. So is it just a coincidence? Or did their death help the mist leave? I don't know. But that was kind of a crazy theory that I read online. But yeah, so that is the movie ending, and it is pretty, like I said, it's just such a downer, but I really liked it though, overall, and it definitely will stick with you. And when it comes to book versus movie, so I like the movie ending, which is more concrete. The book is ambiguous, which I'm fine with the book ending too. But like I said, that movie ending, I will never forget that movie ending. Although I will say the last 20 minutes of the movie, once they leave the store up until the end, there's this like weird choir type music going on, and like it's supposed to feel like very like intense and profound, but it just goes on throughout the last 20 minutes of the movie, and I was getting so tired of that music. So that was my biggest critique with the ending, is just like, enough with this weird choir music already, come on. But then I also did really like, another intense scene is when they kill that soldier, right? Like that was just so intense. And also the camera angles in the movie was really interesting, because it was almost like it was someone there holding it and it would move a lot. So like, not totally found footage, but that's kind of what it reminded me of, like almost more amateur, like it is just someone there in the store just recording things as they happen. So I did think that was a cool style. And despite the bad CGI at times, I was still more invested in the movie, and the performances were great. Specifically, like I said, Marcia Gay Harden, fantastic, which by the way, she was also in Mystic River, which I covered, and she was amazing in Mystic River as well. But yeah, so ultimately I would say the movie wins here. I did like it better, and I was just more invested, like I just said. So, and yeah, it was just more intense than the book was. And the book, I was never like on the edge of my seat, whereas the movie, yeah, I was more like, ooh, like what's gonna happen? So it does have some violent scenes, I will say. It has some gruesome scenes at times, so just be aware of that. But yeah, I would still recommend it. The book, I mean, I don't know. If you're a big Stephen King person, then sure, read it. But if you're not a big Stephen King person, then I would say to skip this one personally. I did also want to say, just I did like in book and movie how obviously a big theme of both is just what happens to this group of people when they're in this intense situation, life and death situation, and how the mob mentality that can happen, and how different ways people cope with it, and how some people go crazier quicker than others. And there were people, aside from the soldiers, there were other people who found prescription pills or just some kind of pills, and they ended up purposefully overdosing and dying because they just couldn't take it. And so it was interesting just seeing how this group of people deals with this situation, you know. But yeah, movie wins. Definitely recommend it. The book, not so much. But that wraps it up for The Mist. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to give my podcast a rating and review. I would appreciate it very, very much. And yeah, thank you again, and I will see you next time. Bye.